and follow, and he has given us some very useful models. The first people who adopt any technology, whether it be microwave oven or narrow pants have come back. For those of you who love narrow pants and don't like my broad pants, let me tell you, my pant was narrower than yours when I was in college. I just want to tell you that. Narrow pants were extremely popular when we were students, and when we were college students, our pants had no pleats, flat. They come back to flat now, you know. So, but anyway, who are the first people who adopted? Why? So they've come up, and we don't have to go in much detail at this point. Diffusion organizations also use the same kind of theoretical models we are talking about. Okay? Okay, so I have summarized everything for you here. Next, please. Next one. Yeah. Okay, how are we doing on time? When are we taking a break? No. Break is not 4:15. It is a tea break. Now, 3:30. Okay, no, I just want to know the time. 3:15. Okay, 15 more minutes, and then we'll take a break. Then I'll speak for a little more time, and then open it up. Now I want to move to another area where health communication found a very hospitable environment. Social psychology, along with medical science and media effects research, in the 60s and 70s, they came up with some very, very important psychological scales or models. We are all psychological creatures, right? And so psychologists have mapped us. There's an inventory for self-esteem scale. There's a self-esteem scale. There's an aggression scale, you know. There's this scale, that scale. These are all psychometric scales or psychology, where they basically ask you a whole bunch of questions. Usually an expert does it. And then you answer. Then they analyze your answer, give you a score. The index has a low score and a high score. If you're high, you're high. Low, you're low. So you're high on, let's say, the self-esteem, or low on self-esteem, like that. These psychological theories also dominated health communication. And guess what? This is a nice thing about our field, which is another challenge. Communication is done all over the place. These guys are in schools of medicine. These guys are in departments of psychology. They don't publish in our journals, but they are doing communication research, or at least a good part. They use the same kinds of models, the persuasion models that was developed first by United States during Second World War. I mean, these things have some pretty dark history, you know. I don't want to make your buying experience bad, but they came from propaganda research of the 1940s. How can I make you do that? No. And then during peacetime, advertisers got government research free, just like they got the internet free in the 1990s. But yet we criticize the government, right? So, what's the difference? While we guys, when I say we guys, those people who are doing, were interested in mass media, and we were tinkering with the mass media a lot, these guys were not interested in mass media. They were interested in interpersonal communication. You know, no mass media. I talk to you, you talk to me. I talk to myself. Intrapersonal communication. We all talk together as members of a group. Group communication. I'm giving you a speech almost now. Speech communication. Lots of communication besides mass media. They used the human communication model. But they took the SMCR model and they just changed the labels. Just simple cut and paste. No thinking, you know. And that's what happens, especially if you're cutting and pasting in a language, no? Sometimes they used to use plural, where you use feminine, you use masculine. Go on, you'll fail. So basically, what happened here was they took and changed the labels. So source is you, receiver is an interpersonal source. Channel is nothing but the air between you and me, your facial expressions, my facial expressions, my hand expressions, your body expressions, all of this that make up what we call, and many times it's us, just us. We are both the sources and receiver, but the model was the same. Okay? So, in other words, the bias of the theory was still the same. And there was another problem with this. A lot of these were proving many hypotheses to be true. How do people, is there a relationship between knowledge and attitude? Anyone done a paper like that? Or heard about that? Knowledge, attitude is all very popular. Those are two psychological variables, social psychological. So we collect data, we run correlations and statistics, and we see if there is a positive correlation between attitudes and behavior. Behavior is the what shall we say? The best ice cream, if you like ice cream. Behavior is what everybody wants. Ultimately, the sociologists, political scientists, advertisers, everybody is interested in behavior. They want you to go and do what they're telling you. So behavior is very important. So much of research has been done in psychology, social psychology. Greater the positive attitude about something, greater are the chances of you either approving it, in terms of behavior, approving it or doing it. Lower the positive attitude, lower the choice. You're not going to go and support something that you really don't have a positive attitude about, right? So all of these have come to us from psychosocial theories. This was going on the entire time, and many of my students have used these models. Sorry, that went away. And these kinds of models are very popular. But the problem with these models was they dealt with only the individual. Okay? Now you might say, what's wrong with that? See, when you read your textbooks, passing your exam is one thing. I'll tell you what, I don't really think that, I know I shouldn't be talking about the Indian context, but US context, I tell them, don't worry about what grade you're going to get in this class. 10 years from now, you won't even know you took this class. Forget the grade. But the knowledge you have picked up, that won't go. That's why when you approach education, when you read something, read for life. Of course, you have to pass the exam, and you will. If you're that kind of person, you will. So, what was I talking about? Yes, at the individual level only. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about health. Okay? And in many of these Asian, African countries, societies are not individualistic. Usually, you consult with your family, you consult with others that you trust, but in Western countries, it's not necessarily true. And so there was the, I want to open my computer so that I have a script of what I'm going to do. I'll keep talking now, but the psychosocial theories also have, just give me 1 second, please. Okay, we have about 5 more minutes and then we'll break up for tea. So let me I have a copy of this, and later on, if you wanted a copy of this PowerPoint, I'm going to leave a copy to the department, so feel free to copy Dr. Amjad Ahmed, or he can tell you others where who to. So I'll do that. So basically, what I was telling about is, so in psychosocial theories, then it was the same thing, except that now we had experts telling us the connection between these different psychological variables, and the individual level could not be generalized in third world countries because that was not the norm in these countries. That was a problem. But another bias was they also considered communication as just information transfer. It was basically, they're finding connections between, let's say, attitudes and behavior. How are attitudes collected? Through some expert-driven scale. How is behavior measured? Through some expert-derived scale. Okay? So we are still talking about this old model, and basically saying that somehow if we can change people's attitudes about something. For example, I've done a lot of HIV research in the 80s and 90s, and one of the problems we used to have about HIV research is that there is no cure for HIV/AIDS, but there is prevention. And one of the things that we talked about, now everybody seems to know, but not in the 80s, safe sex practices. Now this was a very sensitive subject. Just because it's sensitive, we cannot stop talking because we have a disease that was killing hundreds of thousands or 10,000. So there were all kinds of research that we did in the case of HIV, where we looked at people have an attitude problem. They don't like to have safe sex because, again, we came up with a whole bunch of things that men, think that it is not okay to use condoms, but that is a must. So how do we change the attitudes? And so we came up with all this research, and then we found that better the attitude, the better the chances that people would use condoms. Wow, that's fantastic. Then we can control HIV. So these studies were also doing good work, but they were also mining information in the same place, information transfer. So now I want to, or probably this is a good time. Here are some examples. Oh, I can show you. There are lots of examples of. Okay. That is a good thing. Take a break.